Good morning. I'm Cheryl Bode, head of the Russell Library, and we are very happy to have you here. And it's really a pleasure to welcome you to the campus and to Athens. Still a pretty time of the year to be here. I want to recognize a few special guests in our audience, aside from our honoree. And we're very happy to have Senator Miller here and his wife Shirley. And I believe we have a representative from Senator Chambliss' office. Yes, Bill Stembridge. And then we have some Russell trustees who are here, the Russell Foundation, Charles Campbell, who's former chair of the foundation. Charles, if you'll raise your hand. Earl Leonard, and Betty Vandiver, who's also a Russell family member. So we really appreciate your being here. We're very happy to host this special birthday party honoring Bob's 80th birthday. And and we really are here also to thank him for his visionary partnership with the Russell Library. When we first gathered to thank Bob and those of you who have participated in our oral history, we had just celebrated the groundbreaking for this building, which is our new Special Collections Libraries building. And I noted at that time that in 18 to 24 months, we would have the pleasure of having such future programs in our own home, and so here we are. Didn't realize we would get here quite this quickly. I want to take a few minutes to especially thank Chantel Dunham and the staff of the Library's Development Office. They have been a tremendous help to us in preparing for today, so please join me in thanking them. They'll be around throughout the day. They're helping behind the scenes with the luncheon and with tours, and also with helping you handle your parking while you're here. In 2007, Bob and Craig Braden, who's head of our Media and Oral History Unit in the Russell Library, met and they began a collaboration to develop Bob's idea of an oral history program. That program, Reflections on Georgia Politics, brings modern Georgia politics to life through the perceptions and the rich storytelling of those who participated in our oral history program. So I want to now turn the program over to Craig Braden for a few minutes.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. Happy birthday, Bob.
Thank you.
This is awesome. This is the most fun I've had.
There, will you?
Well, it's an honor to be up here. And I'm just going to say a few words about Reflections and Bob and the Russell Library. I'm going to keep it brief because, Bob, to quote you, this is about you. Then I'll ask Chris Lopez to come up to tell some stories from being on the road with Bob. Chris is our oral history coordinator and has been working with Bob mostly for the last couple of years. And he'll show you a few clips from interviews we've recorded since the collection opened 2 years ago. But first of all, I want to recognize Bob's work, the sheer work of what he's done. The 143 interviews we've done so far in Reflections accounts for about 250 hours of content. Typical round-trip travel time to an interview for Bob is around 4 to 5 hours, but has run into days, as was recently the case with the Julian Bond interview. Bob even donates his own gas these days, and occasionally lunch, including a memorable ice cream lunch at the Varsity one time, which he told me not to tell Diana about. So. The preparation time, though, the research, the toil Bob puts into these interviews, it can't be quantified. 8 hours, 16 hours, that doesn't really sum it up. A lifetime would be more accurate. It's been said by some of the people in this room that Bob is the only person who could have done it. My favorite line about Bob comes from Kathy Cox, who paid him a very high compliment when she observed that he's the most effective politician never to have been elected to public office. I would add to that, saying he's one of the most effective historians working outside an academic department. To be on familiar terms with people of historical importance, to recognize their importance to history, and to understand the deeper contexts in which these actors, and often Bob himself, played out their respective historical roles, is on its own remarkable. And then to possess the will and the commitment to preserve for present and future, these personal perspectives on one of George's most critical historical periods, that he chose to give us the gift of his knowledge in time is extraordinary. Bob's contribution to historical preservation over the last dozen years, beginning with his biography of Lester Maddox, is awe-inspiring. And in the span of 5 years, he has had a profound, and I am certain a lasting, impact on the Richard B. Russell Library. Due to Bob's dedication to advancing the Russell Library's mission through his work, our oral history program, which includes over 600 interviews across a dozen collections, has achieved critical mass, becoming a permanent fixture of the library. This is a rare achievement for an academic library, where oral history is typically funded only in fits and starts, on a project-by-project basis. Producing, managing, and archiving interviews, we've become a full-service shop. It was on the basis of reflections that we were able to upgrade our equipment to record and process high-definition video. We were able to point to reflections as a major and growing source of oral history content when designing our exhibit space. And having reflections helped us advocate for a facility in which to record oral history interviews. One only has to walk through the Russell Gallery to see the consequences of Bob's work. A permanent exhibit devoted to oral history, and a studio constructed specifically for interviews. Thinking of what this studio produces over the next decades, what projects we can support, the prospects are truly exciting. We're even now developing a series inspired by StoryCorps, which we are calling First Person Project. Focusing on grassroots, our goal with this project is to give voice to those who might otherwise remain silent in histories yet to be written. But for all his influence on our program and the importance of what he has done for Georgia's history, I value Bob as a colleague, a friend, and as a mentor. He's the kind of person who makes you feel better about yourself for having known him. Bob had dinner with my family a few years back, and he instantly hit it off with my son, Will, who was then about 3 years old. They haven't had a play date for a couple of years, but they are lifelong friends. Bob is someone I or any of the staff can call with questions about Georgia politics and the personalities involved. He'll not only call me back, which is something in itself, but he'll almost always have an answer. I asked him once over the phone who the burly gentleman could be in a still from a film taken during Georgia's Three Governors controversy. And Art Rosenbaum, our muralist and who painted this very scene on the wall in our gallery, will remember this. Anyhow, the fellow was preventing Ellis Arnold from entering the governor's office. Sight unseen, Bob didn't miss a beat. It's Jimmy Dykes. He went on to explain the scene and whose tempers were running high. I learned later from the recovered soundtrack of the film that the man was indeed James Dykes. But what I had gotten from Bob was the soul of the story, as he had heard it probably countless numbers of times over the years by colleagues who had been there. Bob is a natural storyteller, and he gets that without the story, history isn't much more than a set of dates and so-called facts. His regard for the story is truly transcendent. It comes first in the work he has done on reflections, and for someone so immersed in politics, it never ceases to amaze me how unpoliticized Bob is. He has a realistic expectation of what politics can do, because I think he understands better than most of us the humanity of the politicians and public servants he has known and who serve our communities. And also, I think, because he has an expansive sense of humor. Often when I talk to Bob and ask him how he's doing, he says, "Oh, pretty good for an old fella." I'd say that for a fellow of any age, the work he's done over the last few years is better than pretty good. And one last note I need to share with you, a post Bob made to Facebook the other day, even this is a breach of privacy probably, but because it made my wife and I laugh, and it sums up Bob in a nutshell. This is what he wrote. "When you become an octogenarian, you might lose your get up and go. If you lose your get up and go, you might get cranky. If you get cranky, you might lose your friends. If you lose your friends, you might get lonely. If you get lonely, you might kick your dog. If you kick your dog, you might anger your spouse. If you anger your spouse, you might get the silent treatment. Don't get the silent treatment. Keep your get up and go." So it's with deep appreciation and high regard they say, "Happy birthday, Bob." And now I'd like to introduce Russell Library Oral History Coordinator Extraordinary, Christian Earnhardt Lopez.
say a bit about what it's like to be on a shoot with Bob. We've been all over the state, and to date I've done over 50 interviews with Bob, the latest being with Julian Bond, who we went to DC to record and had a remarkable and memorable trip, I think Bob will tell you. We've shot in country clubs, in conference rooms, in church basements, Manuel's Tavern, homes, and so many stories. I don't know how many miles we've racked up getting them, and the history of which they're a part. Me coming from Athens, leaving early, but not too early, so I can try and hit that lull in the Atlanta traffic, before I get to a shoot on time, make sure I can set up, be ready to go by the time Bob gets there. Bob coming from Athens, or from Lake Nottely, as he's done so many times, to go to the Capitol over his life. I worked at the boardroom at the UJ Alumni Center off Lenox, and sometimes both in one day, and sometimes further. We went to Waycross to record Harry Dixon. On the way, we passed through a little town called Soperton. Bob looked over at me and said, "Pull over here," as we approached an unassuming building on the main street. No one about. We entered a quiet and dark space and heard voices in the back and found Hugh Gillis, attending to business as usual. His sight diminished, he did not recognize Bob, but when Bob said, "Hugh, it's Bob Short," his face lit up like an old friend had walked in after many years gone. He was very gracious to us that day, and as we left, he told his assistant to put our oral history program on the list. Later that year, the Russell Library received a wonderful and generous Christmas present from Mr. Gillis. From Soperton, we went to Waycross, where we found a frail but still very lively Harry Dixon and shot into the early evening. I'd heard about Harry from Bob and Cheryl, but I had no idea really. I wish I could tell you all some of the stories he related off camera, but I cannot in such good company. Harry talked for almost 2 hours. We packed up and then made our way to Tifton later that evening, so we could get up early the next morning to be at Fort Spinks's to shoot at 8:30 a.m. It was a long and fast trip, so on the way home up I-75, I did the best I could to get us home expeditiously in the wind and rain. It was after this trip Bob gave me the nickname Earnhardt. Ironically, it is Craig and Bob who have actually been pulled over and not me. But I still had to convince him to let me park his car for him this morning. Many miles, hours, and stories have gone into this program. At the end of February, Bob and I finally had the chance to make a trip we've long discussed but were unable to realize previously. His old friend Julian Bond, whom Bob met as a young college student on the streets of Atlanta, was more than happy to see Bob again after many years and talk with him for our program. The trip and interview went better than we could have hoped for. Mr. Bond was beyond gracious and anticipated all of my needs and concerns with care for my gear as we went around town and the logistics of shooting far from home on another campus. We got to spend the afternoon and evening with him after his interview at American University, and Bob treated Julian, his wife, and I to lunch at one of Bond's favorite restaurants. Then, at Julian's request, Bob taught the first half of his class that evening. It was something to see Bob relating undergraduates his theory on the branch heads of Georgia politics and how all politics derives from these early branches and flows downward dynamically to the rest of the state. And then after that, explaining to them the three governors controversy. And he held them. Later that evening, we were Julian's guests at a packed and televised forum with John Lewis at a popular night spot for arts and politics. And it was like being with a rock star. And Bob got a shout out from Julian during the program in front of that large audience, recognizing the work he had done over his life. Bob doesn't like me bragging on him. He'd be the first to tell you it's not about him. Like it or not, Bob, Craig and I have a nickname for our reflection series, The Bob Show. And it is. Bob, you deserve whatever shout outs, high praise, and great admiration so many of the people we have interviewed have given you in the program. I'm privileged to get to work with you. I get to hear stories and history from its makers, some of which few know and had to be told off camera. I often wish we could record those moments or have the camera running from the get-go and leave it running after. Or at the bucket shop with Mary Beasley, at the Dinglewood Pharmacy in Columbus over chili dogs. Sorry, Diana. Or in the car with Julian Bond, and many more. I'd like now to show you a few clips from our recent interviews. It was a challenging task to cull from almost 30 hours of high-def video, some 6 or 7 minutes of moments to share. I could have shown you Jimmy Polk recounting getting hung out to dry in the Coca-Cola boardroom by both the Georgia Conservancy and Coca-Cola over a bottle bill, or Carol Jackson's retelling and unaffected admiration for the brilliant strategy used against her by the Nancy Schaefer camp to defeat her in the last 3 days of her Senate campaign when she was up 7 points, or Rusty Paul's humble detailing of the strategies and ins and outs of the then young Republican machine in Georgia that he helped grow out of the 80s and into the 90s. From my many talks with Bob, waiting for an interview to start, I picked 3 of our favorite moments, representative of the program. Those of you in the room who have been a part of our program know how much Bob appreciates your willingness to tell your story, your history. Bob has favorite moments from all. What you should also know is how much he admires and respects deeply the work each of you has done in your careers and lives, the impact you've had, the contributions and sacrifices you've made. You are the reason he does this great work.
And I'll never forget one, I'll finish with this one, where the bill was to prohibit the theft of copper wires along telephone lines. I didn't know anything about that, but the telephone company, I think, came to me and said, we got to make this a felony because people were stealing copper wires all over Georgia, selling them and getting a misdemeanor. And so it was a perfectly good bill, nothing wrong with that bill. I introduced it. As the vote was coming up, I noticed that throughout the floor of the House was a whispering campaign. Something was going on. I didn't know whether it's about my bill or what else. And when it came up for a vote, it was disastrously defeated. I mean, I almost was the only one who voted for it. Well, I was distraught. I was almost crying. I was so embarrassed. And I walked up to the bathroom in the back of the hall there. Went in there, just sort of try to get myself together. And one of the old deans of the legislature, I don't know whether it was Fred Hand or who it was, but one of the wonderful old timers, been there 30 years, and who was a friend, I thought, came in to see me, and he put his arm around my shoulders, and he said, son, said, you didn't do very well out there, did you? I said, no, sir, I'm embarrassed. I don't know whether I should even be in politics. And he said, well, let me tell you what you can do. You can go in the House and you can ask on a point of personal privilege for the Speaker of the House, and that was George T. Smith at that time, to allow you to recall that bill tomorrow. You get a chance to do it one time for reconsideration. I didn't know I could do that. I did that, and as I was speaking to that bill a minute, I noticed Mr. Hand, or whoever it was, kind of do this, you know. Bill came up, it was passed without objection. And I asked Mr. Hand afterwards, I said, look, Mr. Hand, what in the world happened? It wasn't my persuasive talk. No, he said, son, just wanted you to learn where the power is. And I did, brother, I did. And it passed, and of course, that was good.
Well, the results of the runoff was very close.
Yep, they were.
It was inside the recount.
About a
margin.
0.5%, yep, recount,
And
anything less than 1%.
And you didn't want to recount. Why wouldn't you want to recount?
Well, a couple of things. You know, first of all, you know, while it was less than a 0.5% difference, 2,500 votes and I really believe it. I believe in the integrity of Georgia's elections system. I mean, I lived it and breathed it for 3.5 years, and that's a big vote swing to do a recount and have the vote swing by 2,500 votes. The second thing, you know, I wasn't going to just go through the motions of it and just because. And I suppose maybe in hindsight, had I done that, the additional ethics issues maybe would have come out and what would have happened, I don't know. But I can only do the best right thing, as I've said, in the moment that I have to do it. And what I knew was the following, that for the Republican Party, you know, obviously this election was a virtual tie. We were a very divided GOP that Wednesday morning. And it would have served no purpose for the GOP, but more importantly, it would have been a gross disservice to the people of the state for me to prolong that whole process. And knowing what I knew as Secretary of State, that the likelihood of a 2,500 vote swing was next to impossible.
But I need to tell you about the class Dr. King taught. Dr. King, Martin Luther King, taught one class at Morehouse. There are 8 people in the class. I'm one of the 8. So Bob, I'm one of 8 people in the universe, in the whole universe, who can say I was a student of Dr. King's. Now I wish I could tell you I took extensive notes and I kept them until today, or I had a tape recorder, I tape recorded the pearls of wisdom that fell from this marvelous man, but I didn't do any of that stuff. I don't remember anything that passed between student and teacher in class, but I remember one day, school was over, we're walking across the beautiful campus, and he turned to me, he said, "Julian, how you doing?" Oh, I said to him, I said, "Doc, how you doing?" His friends called him Doc. I never really called him Doc. I'm telling you a joke here. And he said, I said, "Doc, how you doing?" He said, "I'm not doing well." He said, "Unemployment is high, racism's everywhere, segregation is movable. I feel awful," he said. "I have a nightmare." I said, "No, Doc, turn that around, try I have a dream." So there you go.
Well, there must have been some training that all of you in the movement received from Morehouse. Dr. King, you, many others. Where did that come from?
Well, it came from being surrounded by these figures, because Morehouse, like Lincoln, when I lived at Lincoln, just a who's who in Black America came to the campus and spoke to us. And at Morehouse, a who's who in Black America, a few years later, different generations came and spoke to me at Morehouse College. So if you name a prominent person, black person, in the 1960s, I saw that person speak in my college campus. I don't mean I got to know them or was friends with them, but I saw them, I heard them. And they were impressive people. And they held up a standard for me. This is what I could be. If I work hard, if I study hard, if I lift myself up a little bit, I can be like this. So it was a wonderful example of what you could be if you put your mind to it.
Would you like to go on one of those road trips? I just say that a lot of us in the library are very envious when Chris or Craig take off with Bob on the road again. And I'd like to introduce some of the Russell staff that are here. In the far back, you'll see standing to the left, Abby Adams, Jill, Jan Levinson, Kat Stein, Tammy Kim, and I believe Jill must be upstairs with a research room. Yeah. So as you've seen, this program would not have happened without the interest and insider knowledge of Bob Short and the exceptionally generous gift of his time and energy. He's a co-worker to those of us in the Russell Library. He's a colleague and one of our most outstanding resources, and he is very dear to us. For these reasons and so many more, it's very significant to us that our oral history gallery, our oral history studio rather, will be named for Bob. So the Bob Short Oral History Studio, we have a mock-up of the plaque that will be there. So I'll read that for you. It's being crafted now. It says, a native of Raven County, Bob Short served in the administrations of Georgia Governors Marvin Griffin, Ernest Vandiver, Carl Sanders, Lester Maddox, about whom Bob penned an award-winning biography, and Zell Miller. Bob has been described by former Secretary of State Kathy Cox as the most effective politician never to hold public office. Bob created a lecture and discussion program at Young Harris College entitled Reflections on Georgia Politics, partnering with the Russell Library in 2007 to make Reflections an oral history series. Reflections on Georgia Politics would not exist without Bob and the generous gift of his time, energy, and wisdom. Bob Short is a true friend of the library and a valued colleague of the Russell staff. So please join me in thanking Bob. It's so seldom we get to really thank a volunteer, and that is even more important to us in being able to name our studio for Bob because of all the wonderful help he has given us. Thank you.
Well, we've done a lot of talking from the Russell Library's perspective, but I wanted to ask somebody, a member of Bob's family, to say a few words today. So I'd like to introduce Matt Moffett.
Oh my gosh. I'm but one son-in-law, but one. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know an insightful interviewer, a creative biographer, a credible historian, a learned man. I know a respected political advisor. I know an elder statesman. I know a friend of senators and governors and legislators and one or two presidents. I know a friend of so many Georgians, from the mountains of Blairsville to the shores of Sea Island, Georgia. I know an engaging raconteur. I know a humble humorist. I know a good golfer, a former basketball star, a popular basketball coach, a great athletic example at 80 years young. Happy birthday. I know a respected lay preacher, a church leader, a loving husband, a caring father, a supportive father-in-law, a funny papa. I know a generous man, a humble man, a wise man, an inspirational man, a truly interesting man, and a great Christian man. So my family, this entire Short family, knows Bob Short, and all of you do too. And we love him and we respect him, and he is most deserving of this recognition today. So Bob, happy birthday and congratulations. We love you.
I just want to say a couple of housekeeping things before I forget. Those of you who did not get a pass or a token for your parking, please stop by the front desk on your way out and let them know where you are parked, and they will give you what you need to get out of that deck. And also following the luncheon, we've offered tours of the galleries. So if you would like to take advantage of that while you're here, we encourage you to do so, and just we'll be out probably assembling in the hallway after lunch. So please now help yourself to lunch. We have barbecue over here and some good things to eat. And so if you'll just get up and just sort of orderly, maybe start from that side over there and get lunch. And we have slightly sweetened tea and ice water in the back to drink. So help yourself.
Thank you. I hardly know what to say. I certainly have done nothing to deserve all this. My heart is full. I want to thank each of you for coming. It's a very special thing to me. I'm grateful to the University of Georgia, to the Richard Russell Library, its staff, and all those who made this such a special event for me and my family. With your indulgence at this time, I would like to introduce you to my family, starting off with our daughter Diane, her husband Matt. Please stand. And their children, Kate and Megan. And our daughter Megan, her children, Grant and Ella.
You know, when you stop to think about it, growing old is really not too bad. I've been told that once you turn 80, that you can go to the varsity and eat hot dogs. You can eat chocolate chip cookies, Big Macs, French fries, sleep till noon, all without being criticized by your spouse. I'm indebted to so many people for what they have meant to me personally and to this program. And I would like to take just a minute or two to present to you some of those who have been involved. You've met the staff here. I'd like to introduce the people from Young Harris College who helped to originate this program. I guess now, what, 7 years ago? 7 years. Dr. John Kay. And Professor Louisa Franklin. I especially want to thank Craig and Christopher for what they have meant to me and this program over the years. You've heard from both of them. Some of the things they said were true. Some gave me too much credit for what has been done here, credit that I don't deserve, but that I want to share with all of you. I see the Russell board members here. They have been very, very supportive of what we've attempted to do. I've seen those who were interviewees. I'm grateful to all of them. Would you please stand? Without their cooperation and support, our program would not be what it is today. I want to encourage you to help us all you can to promote this facility, the information that we've gathered, and encourage others, your friends, your children, their children, to utilize it as much as you can. It's available on the internet. All of these interviews are there for your use, and I certainly hope that you will use it. One other special thing I would like to do is to introduce you to my golf foursome. They're here today. About a half hour later than their tea time. But I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Bobby Young and his wife Carolyn. Danny Kendrick and his wife Debbie. Jim Baggett and his wife Dee. They're good friends and golf mates from Butternut Creek golf course up in Blairsville, Georgia. I'd also like to introduce to you a family that has been very close to me for many years. The Lances from Blairsville. Jack Jr., and his wife Carmen, and especially a young man who I greatly admire, who spent more than 30 years in the Georgia General Assembly. And I often say that you can drive through North Georgia and see what this man has meant to us and to his state. That's Carlton Caldwell. And of course, as you all know, I would never forget to introduce my beautiful wife, Diana, who has allowed me the use of time and resources to work on this program. Diana, would you please stand? I think the person that I have admired most, and I've admired them all in politics, public service, has been my friend Zell Miller, who has been a very, very close friend, a BFF, if you will, for over 65 years. Senator, I'm honored that you're here. Also honored that you brought your lovely bride, my good friend Shirley, and that you're sitting with my favorite basketball coach, a man who, you know, this, I want you to believe this because this is true. A lot of people don't know this. This man took the University of Georgia basketball team, mediocre at best, not a good record, into the Southeastern Conference tournament and won it, and took them to the NCAA after having replaced the fellow who couldn't do that. So Coach Herman, we're glad to have you here also. As I look around, there are many, many old friends that I'd like to present to you, but in the interest of time, and I hope it doesn't slight them, I see Senator Doss over there. Sam Doss was a state senator in 1960 or before. He and I were in the JCs together until they kicked us out at age 36. That's the time they called you an exhausted rooster. And we were just talking about it. And I asked him, I said, now what was the age when we had to stop being a JC? And he said 36. But you can stretch it a little. I said, can you stretch it all the way to 80? But anyway, thank you so much, all of you. I love you. This is your program, not mine. If you have any thoughts, if you have any suggestions, if you have any interview possibilities of people who can contribute, then I certainly appreciate it. Again, thank you, and I love you all.